artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hi, and welcome to episode 217. We're going to talk about AI in education today. It is an incredibly important topic that we've visited before, and we're going to visit many times again. It's suffered a huge impact from ChatGPT and large language models, and even in using the word suffering there, I'm implying a tilt toward the negative impact, when what I really want to do is talk about the huge opportunities that have been created in that field and really precipitating the largest revolution and change in education in 150 years, if not longer. Teachers are doing the most important job on the planet right now because they are literally educating the generation that is going to save the world, that needs to save the world because of the convergence of threats and changes and disruptions like climate change, the ever-present possibility of nuclear war, and the dual threat and opportunity posed by AI itself. All of this comes to a head within the career span of the generation that is currently being educated. That's why this is so important to me. Now, I've talked with many teachers, and there's a huge groundswell of anger and fear out there that they're going to lose their jobs, as you can find in virtually every profession these days. Just how much disruption has been caused by AI and the sensationalism around it. There are many, many people going around now afraid that they're about to lose their jobs. Now, of course, we should be careful about generalizing, and I don't want to make any promises that aren't truly warranted. But I am convinced that teachers, especially in the lower grades, should not and will not lose their jobs. The picture gets a bit murkier as we get into the post-secondary years, especially if we're talking about teaching assistants. That is a role that I expect to be under immediate threat from large language models. But kindergarten teachers? Of course not. Elementary school teachers? No. And high school teachers are where this comes to a head the most. That's where the pain of this disruption is being felt the most. That's where the most opportunities are being created for transforming the way that we raise children to prepare them for entering post-secondary education or the workforce. We've talked a lot about the future of work on this show, and that's an entire industry unto itself these days. And it strikes me that the issues that we discuss under the banner of the future of work are exactly the ones that I see showing up in the future of education. And in fact, if we start thinking about the future of humanity, we see the same issues show up again. Many, many more issues than we can get to in this episode, of course. But I want to start talking about our human brains, this thing on top of our necks, and the load that those are under. That is increasing exponentially. That's provable. You can look at the rate at which scientific papers, peer-reviewed studies are being published and see that that's increasing exponentially. On average, the number of papers published doubles every 10 to 15 years, more often in some subjects. In fact, during the time that this episode is playing, something like 20 new papers in oncology alone will be published on average, which means that if you're a cancer researcher, your choices are roughly between trying to skim the abstracts of papers published in your field or doing actual research. And I know it can't work out that way in practice, but the numbers don't lie, so there's got to be some kind of compromise. And certainly the rate at which papers continue to be published is not going to go down. It's only going to increase, accelerate, because, again, studies have shown that people are using large language models to produce more of those. So that rate is only going to go up. What's not going up is the rate at which human beings read. This message brought to you by Captain Obvious. So what happens to scientific research and, by extension, everything else that relies upon the human brain? Does it stagnate? Does it taper off? Does it not get any faster because the human brain, our ability and rate of understanding things, becomes a bottleneck? Well, that would suck. We have to find a way of doing more. And just in the nick of time, large language models come along to provide the opportunity of understanding as a service, that they could extend our ability to understand things, make that faster, become a prosthetic part of our brains. Now, we don't look at them so much in that light yet, but that is where they have the potential to go, and that is where they must go. And getting back to education, it is today's children who will get there first with that. They will learn through the magic of neuroplasticity how to do that faster than anyone else. Children are already expert at adapting to new technology. I've only got to look at my 14-year-old daughter texting her friends to ask myself, how is it possible that anyone's thumbs could move that fast? I tried, mine don't. So part of the job of education is going to be helping them figure out how to use AI in order to increase the rate at which we understand new knowledge. But to do that, we have to get past the disruption that is causing so much angst in education right now, which comes down to some very prosaic, very practical, down-to-earth conflicts. See, large language models have not created a learning problem. They've created a learning opportunity. They've not created a teaching problem. They've created teaching opportunities. They have created an assessment problem. Teachers who are used to finely grading a student's performance in a subject by assigning homework find that large language models can do that homework just as well, better in some cases. Not as well in others, but certainly enough to create a problem. It's not an insoluble problem, and it's not a new problem. Obviously, it has existed in the past where the homework might have been done not by ChatGPT, but by Big Sister Susie. But obviously, there weren't that many compliant Big Sister Susies to make this a wide-scale problem. Now, every single student has the access to a tool that can perform as well. Now, as I said, it's not insoluble. Some schools have already moved back to assessing students in the classroom where you can monitor them and tell that they're not using large language models or any other proscribed technology. And if you do that and then assign them homework later on, you can look at that and compare to their previous results and get a sense of whether the homework was performed by the same entity. But of course, that would still be missing out on most of the opportunities that are being created by the arrival of AI in the education field. Look at physical education, for instance, which is the one subject that isn't hugely impacted by AI. Would you teach that by spending class time lecturing on the biceps muscle and then telling students to do 100 push-ups in their room that evening? That would be backwards, of course. So why do we think that's the right model for every other subject? More on that in a bit. Teachers, I know that your world has been hugely disrupted by AI. Like everyone else that's happened to, you're angry about it. But unlike most of them, the opportunity here for you is to be transparent about the effects upon you, because your students will be hit by even more disruption, no matter what field they go into. Change will never again happen as slowly as it is happening now. And they need to see what it's like to deal with that. So the opportunity here for you is to be the role model for how to deal with disruption to your career, to your life, gracefully, to find the opportunities in it, to leverage it for the benefit of yourself and everyone around you. But okay, where do you start? First, by acknowledging that AI is here to stay. It is not a fad like Pokemon Go or avocado toast. we have barely started to react to the changes that it is bringing. Those changes have already happened. We just haven't reacted to them yet. It's like attaching a rubber band to a bowling ball and pulling on it. Well, that band stretches and stretches and stretches, and the ball does not move at all until eventually it starts to move slowly and slowly. The force on the rubber band is AI, and we are the bowling ball. And that force has already been applied, but we move and react slowly. So even if there were no further developments in AI, we would, in short order, start accelerating to catch up with what's already happened. Secondly, forget about banning AI from student use. Obviously, you can't control what they do outside the classroom. And do you really want them to move on to the workplace not knowing how to use a tool that will be an essential part of every business, everywhere that they could possibly go? It already is. Far from minimizing their access to it, we need them to become incredibly good at it. That will make them competitive. Now, that's not to say that they should use ChatGPT for learning everything. I didn't go to the gym yesterday because there were a whole lot of iron discs that needed to be moved from one place to another. It would have been much more efficient to use a skip loader to do that. There's still just as much value in teaching children arithmetic, even though there are calculators. Calculus, even though there's Wolfram Alpha, and writing essays on why Miss Havisham is so messed up in Great Expectations, even though ChatGPT can do a perfectly serviceable job of that now. But because all of that learning results in transferable skills, which we generalize to making it useful for doing other things. Just like if you got a resume that said the writer was a chess grandmaster, well, you would assume with justification that they were good at strategic planning and reacting under pressure. Even though they cannot beat an AI like AlphaZero at chess, but AlphaZero cannot run a company. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you heard us explore these ideas when Grandmaster Jonathan Rowson was on the show in episodes 70 and 71, and who is now exploring complex ideas of philosophy and resilience to future change. You may sense with frustration that there's not an answer in there yet about when and why to use large language models in teaching. We are still developing these answers. One of the things I do with schools is present a framework on how and when to use AI, and it has 7 different use cases to evaluate, including the one of when not to use AI. But obviously one of the things that must change is how homework is assigned and evaluated, as I was talking about earlier. This doesn't have to be a big problem. In fact, I'm going to say that by the time you have gone through the larger issues that AI is raising in education, you'll look back on the homework one and go, we were worked up about that. There were much bigger fish to fry. Because what's more of a challenge going forward is how to evaluate a student's work when they're allowed to use ChatGPT, which I will, as usual, use as a stand-in for all other LLMs. It's just the most convenient name, and it's nice to do that instead of using generic terminology. And not letting them use it for producing a final answer, but for helping them get better. See, there are too many ways that an LLM can dramatically improve learning to want to ignore or prohibit them. You see, AI amounts to providing each student with a full-time tutor in every subject who can understand their learning style, provide information to them at their level of comprehension, answer questions around the clock with infinite patience, and tailor the interactions to every cultural and demographic facet of the student. And of course, you'd say, yes, that's exactly what human tutors do. Of course. But only the wealthiest can afford a tutor in every subject for their child. And even those tutors aren't available around the clock. But now that same value is available to everyone. And that really is the more accurate description of the world that we now live in. And that would be exciting and welcome news to teachers. Which teachers would object to their students having tutors available at home to help them? Teachers can present a topic in the classroom on Wednesday. Say they teach them about the refraction of light. Student doesn't get it all, but they go home have a conversation one-on-one with ChatGPT about this. And a school that gets this will provide a ChatGPT for them that's been customized to act as a tutor rather than an answer provider. The student asks questions. Maybe they completely missed the concept in class, and so they say, explain this to me like I'm 7 years old. Sometimes I do that myself. Then they get that and they work up to everything they missed out on. Or the student might be one with a really questioning mind, and they say, well, if light travels slower in some substances, how come it travels at a constant speed in that medium instead of decelerating and eventually coming to a stop like everything else I'm familiar with? That's a question the teacher may not have been able to deal with. But these two students and everyone in between can tackle the subject in individual ways that there just wasn't time to do in the classroom, and come back on Thursday ready to show the teacher how much more they've learned. Now, what teacher would object to that? Think what that means. We need to get there as soon as possible. You can see how much the process of education can and should change. The teacher's job is to focus on the qualities that the AI cannot embody, the personal interactions that occur face-to-face, when the teacher makes that lasting impression that inspires the student, that they remember the rest of their lives. I remember things that my teachers taught me frequently, almost every day. I remember something that my high school mathematics teacher, Ray Fratton, at Southend High School for Boys, told me. He believed in me. He gave me advanced tutoring outside of school hours, and he stuck up for me when I needed an advocate. Also, whenever I'm tempted to say something like, "It is clear that," in the middle of an explanation, I remember when I put that in a proof, and he said that was simply showing that I didn't know what I was talking about, and that if something is clear, then it should be easy to prove, so do that. He not only set those high standards, he somehow conveyed them to me so they became my standards too. Surely that's what any teacher would say is the reason they got into teaching. Of course, the process of teaching isn't all stand and deliver moments of joy and inspiration. I spent countless hours in Ray's classroom, and much of it was copying down notes he dictated or wrote on the blackboard. Gives you an idea of how long ago it was. And how much time he must have spent marking the papers of everyone in class. No multiple choice tests for him. Those hours were necessary to the process. But now, we can ask ourselves, how much of that can be replaced by AI? And if we can do that, then can teachers then spend more of their time having the meaningful interactions with students that they will remember? Because no student is going to remember something ChatGPT said for the rest of their life. But as a teacher myself, I've spent plenty of hours at the head of a classroom of one kind or another. Both of my parents were teachers, so there was some genetic basis to this, I guess. I get in the zone, in a flow state when I'm teaching a student or when I'm coaching an executive. When time disappears and I know that I'm being my best self at that moment because the light bulbs are going off for the other person. And if we're not developing AI to enable us to have more of that kind of experience, then what the heck is the point? That's exactly what machines are for, to free us up to experience more of what it means to be a human being. But we won't get there if teachers try to ban AI from schools or stop kids from using it. They need to be looking at what it can do for them. Something that can be an expert tutor to students in every subject certainly has value to teachers in constructing lesson plans, for instance, and personalizing content. Imagine producing instructional videos about chemistry, say, that star some of the staff at the school or are set in places the students are familiar with. The potential is incredible. We could spend a whole episode talking about different possibilities there. Now, that's going to be a huge pivot. And anyone would quail at the amount of work that clearly needs to be done. And most teachers in the US, for sure, aren't paid enough. I could end the sentence there. Aren't paid enough to go out and do that kind of development. So we need joint efforts. And that's what I'm working on. I have a detailed framework for approaching this work that lays out the steps any school needs to take, and I help schools execute on that. So now maybe you're thinking, oh, this episode has been one long commercial and you've only just found out. But really, this work is so important to me, to kids, to schools, to everyone, that it needs to get out there as far as possible. And time is of the essence. A new school year is about to start, and by the time it finishes, the issues of AI in education will have radically shifted. We cannot wait. As much as I hate to be sensationalist or alarmist and say things like, get on board now or it'll be too late, that's pretty much a reality. A year from now, there will be multiple institutional AI systems for schools to choose from. And they'll feel obligated to choose between product A, B, or C, each costing tens of thousands of dollars or more, but delivering stupendous value and also vendor lock-in. And their admins will be trying to decide between different large language model backends and comparing token counts and other transactional data that they just won't be prepared for if they haven't spent the time in between now and then getting to know the technology from its fundamentals and getting their staff on board. It'll be like walking into a used car lot without knowing what a steering wheel is. They'll just be a snack for this first salesperson to set eyes on them. School staff have enough problems as it is without facing that kind of stress. Start now. You can reach me at peter@humancusp.com. I want to help. One of the things I tell people to help with the decision is to treat AI as a person instead of a tool. Think of it not as installing software, but onboarding a new hire. Granted, this new hire has some enormous quirks, and there are definitely tasks and environments they are not suited to, but there are so many ways in which they excel that it's totally worth figuring out those exceptions so that you can get those enormous benefits. I liken it to, might be dating myself a bit here, the movie Rain Man. Tom Cruise, Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman is Rain Man. Autistic, but the old and no longer PC term is idiot savant, meaning that there are some mental tasks at which he is superhuman. Now, are there many places you do not want to go with Rain Man? Of course. Would be bad for you, bad for him. What about Vegas? Yes, you want to go to Vegas with Rain Man. You would clean up until they threw you out for cheating. And this more or less happened in the movie. So think of AI like Rain Man and find all the different Las Vegases where you can get that enormous benefit. Another thing that you can expect is what might be a kind of mini headline on this show, because I expect that we will soon be able to interact with any book on Kindle via a large language model, as though you had pasted the book into a learning prompt so you could then ask questions about it. Clearly, that would be so easy for the average developer at Amazon to do that the only reason it hasn't happened yet must be working out licensing and royalties. But here's the mini headline. Pearson, the textbook publisher, is already doing this. I wish I'd told you my idea in an earlier show so you could see I thought of it before they did. That's just vanity, though. Pearson lets you interact with any of their e-texts in exactly the way I envisioned. Anyway, education and AI is a rapidly evolving intersection. We will be coming back to it frequently. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, and entirely apropos for this episode and recent events, two of Google DeepMind's new AI systems, AlphaProof and Alpha Geometry 2, achieved a silver medal performance at the International Mathematical Olympiad. The IMO challenges pre-college mathematicians with 6 problems over 2 4.5-hour sessions, much harder than any questions anyone encounters at high school. Not in terms of what you have to know to solve them, in that sense they are high school level problems, but they require ingenuity at a level rarely tested at high school. DeepMind's AI correctly answered 4 out of 6 problems, scoring 28 out of 42 points, only 1 point away from a gold medal. Now, you might think this isn't such a big deal because the problems would be in their training sets. But no, IMO problems are created anew for each contest. DeepMind's AI can now solve 83% of historic IMO geometry problems from the past 25 years, up from 53% in its previous version. In case you're wondering, how hard are those problems? Here's an example from 2011, one that involves little notation so that I can read it out. Let n, which is bigger than 0, be an integer. We are given a balance and n weights of weight 2 to the 0, 2 to the 1, up to 2 to the power n-1. We are to place each of the n weights on the balance, one after another, in such a way that the right pan is never heavier than the left pan. At each step, we choose one of the weights that has not yet been placed on the balance and place it on either the left pan or the right pan until all of the weights have been placed. Sounds easy enough? That's not the question. The question is, determine the number of ways in which this can be done. Answers for that do involve a lot of notation, so I'm not going to try reading them out over the air. And the AI solved the most difficult problem, which only 5 of the human contestants in the most recent IMO managed to crack. While the human contestants had about 9 hours, the AI solved one problem in under 19 seconds, but took up to 3 days to solve the others. Possibly you might decide that's not good enough. But clearly the writing is on the wall. Only 18 months ago, experts thought this level of math skill from an AI was 5 to 7 years away. Bear in mind, we're not talking about, as you heard, multiple choice questions here. Many of these problems require creativity, reasoning, and problem-solving abilities for humans to solve them, which is why claiming that an AI can't or doesn't have those qualities is so unwise. If it gets the right answers, then either it has those qualities, or it is able to imitate them to a degree that it makes no difference. By the way, the Metaculus group prediction for when AI will win the gold IMO medal has dropped to January 2026. Next week, my guest will be Sophie Kleber, UX Director, that's User Experience, for the future of work at Google, an expert in ethical AI and future human-machine interaction. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.